Hello viewers, I hope everyone's doing well. I just thought I'd give you an update video because I've been quite quiet on my channel lately, and although it's not like I feel like I owe people explanations for things necessarily, I do feel something of an obligation to keep you in the loop as to what's going on behind the scenes, particularly those of you who are very generously and kindly supporting the channel as patrons and YouTube members. I have been struggling with my mental health recently, more so than usual. I think Mike's death hit me quite hard, and other things kind of going on in the periphery have also been challenging for me to kind of deal with emotionally. So it's just been an opportunity, I guess, over the Christmas and New Year to just slow down a little bit and try to get myself on an even keel. And one way I did that was with the mushrooms. And that prompted quite a lot of further introspection on where I stand with God and my beliefs and that kind of thing. And I thought I'd just kind of have a candid conversation with you, if you don't mind, about where I am with all of that. Truthfully, I'm a bit confused. And it's nice to be confused now and then. It's nice to not quite feel like one has everything figured out. It's nice to be in that process of just surrendering to learning, because obviously since leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, first of all, in the very early days, I identified as a non-denominational Christian. Then I switched to agnosticism, which I guess is where I've always stayed, but I then began to identify as an agnostic atheist. I'm not completely letting go of that because it feels as though that label took me quite a lot of struggle and quite a lot of critical thinking to get to. It was like a marker point and some hard-won territory that I managed to take after my cult experience. But having said that, I have had some, you could say, spiritual experiences using these mushrooms that have really given me a different perspective on things. So now I'm debating whether I am an agnostic atheist or an agnostic deist. I'm definitely not a theist, just to be clear. It's impossible that I would go back to religion. I'm just not, my brain isn't wired in that way where I can just accept as truth things that cannot be proven, which I personally feel is what you need to do in order to be religious. It's all about faith. You have to have faith in things that you can't see, and that's just not the way my mind works. And I think that way of thinking can take you to all sorts of dangerous ideologies. It's basically a case of whoever's the most charismatic person that comes along and can convince you to believe in this thing that you can't see, give them the trophy, sort of thing. Deism, on the other hand, is different. It's not religion. It's accepting the possibility of there being a higher power. Not necessarily a higher power that's interested in what we're doing here on this planet and guiding things and intervening in things and just a higher power, is what deism deals with. And from an ideological point of view, I've never really had an axe to grind of any kind with deism, because what is there to debunk? Someone says, oh, I think there might be a God, but I don't think it's an interventionist God, and I don't think it's involved in any of the religions. I don't think it is behind the Bible or whatever. What is there to debunk in that? It's just something that it's like a hunch that someone has, and it's not something where they're going to start stirring up a deist cult following to follow their deist teachings. I mean, if you can imagine it, maybe someone can do it, but it's hard to imagine any kind of deist cult. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me in the comments. But let me go through the two definitions. Agnostic atheist is someone who does not believe in the existence of any gods, atheism, while also not claiming to know for certain whether gods exist or not. Agnosticism. So this is off ChatGPT, by the way. What could possibly go wrong in letting AI adjudicate on these things? That's agnostic atheism. Agnostic deism, an agnostic deist is someone who believes in the existence of a god or higher power, deism, but also acknowledges that the nature, existence, or attributes of this God cannot be known for certain, which is agnosticism. And right now, I feel like I'm traveling in between these two labels. And labels can be problematic. It's easy to embrace a label, isn't it? But I think people are more complicated than just labels. But in any case, I am, let's just say, more open to the latter label now than I was just over a year ago, when I had my first mushroom experience, and I made a video, it's on the channel, where I talk about that experience of, as an atheist, taking some mushrooms, being on this 4-hour trip where I'm kind of ripped out of reality, and having a conversation with, well, it referred to itself as that, or it. Didn't like being called God. So I have this conversation, and most of the conversation was about suffering, and the take home from that episode, that first trip, was it telling me suffering makes it real, which isn't like, it's not like, oh wow, yeah, that makes total sense, that answers all of my questions, but it's at least a start. It's because if you're playing a computer game, there needs to be a cliff that you don't want to fall off for the game to be interesting. If there was zero suffering in life, and we were just all floating around with everything made of pillows, no one could hurt themselves, there was no way of any danger or threat or whatever, would life be as interesting? And that's something I continue to grapple with. I guess I grappled with that as a Jehovah's Witness, because that's what's supposed to happen in paradise. Is it says no harm will befall you. There's not going to be any possibility of you dying or even being injured. And I always thought, how would that work? You go on a hike and you slip. Does an angel catch you? And blah blah blah. So, suffering makes it real was at least something that I could mull over, and I continue to mull over it. Trips 2 and 3, I also got to speak to it, but the conversations were far more aggressive on my side, really having a go with the person I was talking to, and at one stage it seemed like I was talking to an entire coliseum of people. And I was apoplectic, I was enraged at this idea of humans being used almost as entertainment, which is how it felt in the trip, is that we were being watched and we were just like some kind of reality TV show. That was the feeling I got. And I was really mad, and I was hurling the strongest imaginable abuse at God. And so those were trips numbers 2 and 3. And then I went for a while not really able to have a trip 4, because mushrooms are quite hard to get hold of in a country where they're illegal. Yeah, I went for a long time. I had something, 1 or 2 attempts, shall we say, but nothing that was anything like the first few conversations. And then recently, after Mike died, Mike Grinder, I managed to get hold of some, and really kind of needed that psilocybin boost, because what some of you probably don't know is that the psilocybin or psilocybin in the mushrooms, in certain psychedelic mushrooms, is proven to help alleviate depression. And I would rather have a natural form of therapy for my depression than to be on anything that's messing with my serotonin, like on a daily basis, where I'm unable to experience the full range of emotions, just being kept on this zombie-like autopilot. I do still take some antidepressant medication, but I no longer take anything that does that, and I rely instead on the psilocybin, or psilocybin, depending on whether you're British or American. So I had this 4th trip, and pretty early on in the trip I could tell it was going to be a big one, because it was really hitting me. Although I was a little bit apprehensive about whether it would want to talk to me, given the fact that I had hurled so much abuse on the last occasion. And it was quite quiet. I actually, by the way, there's a video which I don't feel comfortable sharing with everybody. I shared it with 3 people, where I was just coming out of the trip, so still under the influence, kind of. And I gave a much clearer and more vivid description of trip number 4 in that video, but I just don't feel comfortable sharing it with everybody at this time. So instead, I'm just going to give you some cliff notes from it. And if there's any banging going on, it's because I have an extremely irritating neighbour downstairs who randomly is banging on his apartment and has been doing so for many weeks. So, trip number 4, I am talking about money and power and control, because God wanted to use my body and I said, you can have it for a week. You can have it for a week once I've been with my kids, no problem. But what you're going to find is, I was saying this to God, is there are much better bodies for you to inhabit than mine. You will be entering the body of a 45-year-old guy who is struggling with his mental health, who is stranded in Croatia, feels stranded in Croatia. And I listed all of the issues I was dealing with. It would make way more sense if you were to enter the body of someone who, let's say, had lots of power and influence, so that you could make a difference, so that you could change things for people. And I started saying, what's the point of being God? What's the point of being God if you don't have power and influence and control? The whole idea, the whole concept of God is pointless unless you're able to do something. And then it made me say, just some rest is fine. And I felt pinned down to my bed. And it was the most intense feeling of rest that I have ever had in my life. Just feeling completely immersed in my sheets, just pinned down, can't move, totally serene and rested. And I said, this feels nice. And it became clear to me that God wanted my body so he could rest, or it could rest. And then I started talking about that, about how God wanted to rest. And I was saying, I'd love to rest, but I can't. I need to do this and that and that. And that's when it hit me that in the Old Testament, in the Genesis narrative, you have all the different days of creation. And then it says, and on the seventh day, God rested. Because repeatedly I'm being made to say, just some rest is fine. And then it hit me, God wants to rest. God just wants to rest. So in other words, I'm stressing continually about my life, particularly about my girls, and the obligations and duties that I have. I'm whether I like it or not, I'm in this particular set of circumstances where I have people who I'm responsible for, and I have duties and obligations and blah, blah, blah. And that's what it means, essentially, to be God, is to create, is to be constantly struggling, constantly fighting for something. But just because you create something doesn't mean that you have to stay invested in every little thing that happens because of your creation. So just because I created my daughters, Jessica and Julia, yes, I have some duties and obligations towards them, but I don't need to overly worry about every little thing that's going to happen to them. You create, and then you let go. You let go. You rest. You detach. And that's what it means to be God. And that's what I got from this experience. And it was like God was making me experience that and helping me understand that that's what God is doing. God is resting. And it's interesting because that part of the Genesis narrative really never made sense to me as a Jehovah's Witness. Because all throughout the Old Testament, God is presented, or Yahweh is presented, as this extremely powerful, restless, vengeful God with unbounding energy and unbounding animosity and resentment towards those who cross him. And yet, we're told that when he was creating everything, it was somehow exhausting, And it's like, oh, I've got to rest now. Well, if you're all powerful, why do you need to rest? And since thinking about it some more, it's made me, the thoughts occurred to me, what if the Bible writers were borrowing some kind of enlightenment from maybe a previous tradition that had gone before them? We know that there were outside influences on the Bible. We know that certain stories in the Gospels are basically plagiarized from Greek mythology. I had someone on the channel explaining that. We know that a good deal of the stories in the Old Testament are sort of plagiarized from Neo-Babylonian mythology. Daniel is a direct borrowing from a character, a mythical character from that region. So the writers of the Bible were kind of just taking stuff from everywhere. And what if one of those things that they took from maybe a more enlightened, dare I say it, earlier tradition or set of beliefs was this concept of God needing to rest? Because that's one thing that fascinates me about mushrooms is that they've literally been here all the time, that humans have been here. And, humans have been taking them for millennia. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating way of kind of bypassing all of the nonsense and all of the dogma. And for me, at least, it's a way of just going straight to the source. It's not always fulfilling, it's not always enriching, but this trip number 4 was pretty profound for me, and in fact, it was so profound that I now feel like I can't fully identify as an agnostic atheist anymore, or at least I'm more uncertain about that now. I feel like I might be on a journey. Well, I know I'm on a journey, and it's possible that that journey ends up with some form of deism, some form of agnostic deism. But the good news is that I still can't stand religion. I still think that the Bible is mostly a very, very hateful, nonsensical collection of writings. Again, some bits of it probably have kernels of truth that were maybe borrowed from previous traditions, but so that's where I am. And I'm always a little bit nervous about opening up like this on my channel, because I never know how it's going to be received and whether people are going to start drawing conclusions. It's very, very personal to talk about these things, but I like to think that the vast majority of you viewers are sympathetic to my situation and are willing to give me the space to go on these journeys and to question my beliefs from time to time. And yeah, I like to think that you're rooting for me. And if you're watching this as an atheist, as an agnostic atheist, and I was one of the ones that brought you to agnostic atheism or helped you to feel affirmed in any way, I'm still the same Lloyd, and I'm still not fully walking away from agnostic atheism. I think that it has an awful lot of sense to it. It's just that for me, I think I've spoken before about my nihilism. I am quite nihilistic. I don't really feel as though there is any intrinsic purpose to life. I think it's all about what you want to take from life. And I view life as a game that you either play, or you either play it or you don't play it. You have to make the choice. And having chosen to play this game, I'm doing it on my terms, and those terms are that I keep my mind as open as possible. Not so open that I go joining another cult or starting another cult, heaven forbid, but at least open enough so that I don't completely close off other possibilities. And I've spoken to enough people, including my therapist, I might add, with experience with psychedelics, who understand psychedelics and what they do and the history of them, shall we say, to know that my experiences are not unique at all. Many people have been on similar, shall we say, enlightenment journeys, and that's what I want to go on. I get to do that. I get to decide, I think. And the other thing I would say, of course, which I think I said in my first video where I talked about mushrooms, I'm not telling everyone to take mushrooms. I honestly don't believe everyone should take mushrooms, because it can be quite scary, There's lots of crying, at least for me. Every time I do a mushroom trip, I'm absolutely draining myself. I'm draining my tear ducts completely dry. That's how much crying I do. It can be quite scary. And this stuff isn't for everybody. And not everyone needs it, quite frankly. Not everyone is struggling with depression or struggling with the same type of depression, shall we say. So I'm definitely not, can I just be clear, definitely not telling you all to go out and find some mushrooms. If anything, let me just say, don't go out looking for mushrooms. However, if you're wondering why I'm suddenly a little bit more amenable, shall we say, to deism, to the point where I'm even considering whether I'm a deist or not, this is the reason why. It's not proof of God, it's not evidence of God. I would never ever put my personal experience on the table and say, because I have had this personal experience, you should all believe this. And I think that's when things start to get a little bit preachy and dogmatic and religious. Some person makes a claim about their special bond with the Almighty and insists that because of their particular bond, everyone needs to follow them and listen to what they have to say. And that's absolutely not what this is about at all. Definitely not. I've just had some quite profound personal experiences that have given me a different perspective on things. I still can't stand religion, and I still think the Bible is a mostly made up book written by men. In many cases, very hateful, small-minded men. So there you go. That's where I am. I think that's all I wanted to share, other than to say that I'm not posting as much right now because I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with my mental health. That said, I am looking forward to the new JW Broadcasting episodes coming out. I want to get back into those rebuttals. I'm working on a really interesting interview video that I did with a Spanish lawyer. Unfortunately, the subtitling and everything is taking way longer than I anticipated, but that's coming up soon. So I am busy, just maybe not visibly busy as I would like to be. But that's about everything I've got to share with you. I hope you found this video interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.